Hello everyone, my name is Laura Wilson. I am the Outreach Librarian for the campus libraries. Thank you all for coming to our Authors on the Hill Campus Author Lecture Series. We are very pleased to welcome Professor Stephanie Reents from the English Department. Today she will talk to us about her recent publication, I Meant to Kill Ye. This book was recently published by Small Press Distribution. Professor Reents will be selling copies of the book should you like to purchase one. After the presentation, please enjoy the food in the back and consider leaving us some feedback on the survey form that we have on the refreshment table. So without further ado, I present to you Professor Reents.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Laura, for having me, and thanks to the library for having me, and thanks to so many students and colleagues for coming to this, to my talk. I'm actually going to read a little bit, mostly. So just a little context. Some of you won't need context because you've been forced to read Blood Meridian with me this year in Montserrat. But when I was a senior in college, I read All the Pretty Horses, which was Cormac McCarthy's first kind of his first like popular success, the first of his trilogy. So that was 1992 when that book came out, and I really liked it, and I think I liked it in part because it was a book about the West, and I was a Westerner. I firmly saw myself as a Westerner. I was at Amherst College. I was the only kid from Idaho, and people still ask questions like, do you have like indoor plumbing in Idaho? They ask ridiculous questions, and so I very much identified as a Westerner. And so I read this Western, and I immediately, as I was kind of like want to do in those days, I read everything that Cormac McCarthy had written. I think I often did my reading in like the sub basement of Frost Library. Frost Library had like, the first floor, and then level A, and then level B, and then level C. And level C was always deserted and always a little dark, but it was a great place to burn through novels if that's what you wanted to do. So I read all of his work, and Blood Meridian was the last novel before All the Pretty Horses. And I got to the end of Blood Meridian, and I was like, I didn't even really understand what it was about, and I certainly didn't understand what it was about, and I really didn't even understand what had happened in the novel. I read the last page, and I was like, I don't get it. But it had this like kind of intense hold on me. And it was the first novel that had ever made me, it was so like brutal at moments that I actually had to close the book because it was so, my reaction to it was so viscerally intense. And I was like curious, like how does a writer do that? And so I, for the next kind of, to be honest, for the next 20 years, I sort of periodically reread Blood Meridian. I taught it a couple of times. I think the first time, I don't even know what I said about it because I still think I didn't understand it the first time I taught it. So when I got the opportunity to do this project, I had just finished teaching Blood Meridian here at Holy Cross, and I had said to my husband, I'm never teaching this novel again. And then I saw the novel on this list of books that I could write about, and I was like, I'm going to write about Blood Meridian. And so in part, this project was really about, I think most good projects start from a place of not knowing or a place of mystery. So for me, this was about first trying to figure out why Blood Meridian was so mysterious, trying to put the kind of reaction I had to it into words, trying to find in the text things that seemed mysterious to me. So what does this novel do to produce what does it do to produce confusion in a reader, or a sense of mystery in a reader? What makes it so mysterious? And then the second thing I sort of wanted to do, or ended up doing, was that I wanted to figure out, like, well, who was I when I first read it that this novel appealed to me so deeply, right? So both trying to figure out the novel and trying to figure out something about myself as a reader at the time when I encountered it as a 22-year-old. Why was I so drawn to an incredibly difficult novel? And then, third, I'll say that there were other kind of mysteries that came up along the way that sort of kept this project really interesting for me. So I'm going to just read a little bit from the first chapter, that sort of sets things up. I apologize if you know Blood Meridian well, because I have a very long summary of it. And then I'll read a little bit about the mystery, this mysterious note I discovered in the archives, which I thought, mistakenly, would reveal the novel to me, would answer my questions about it. And then I'll read a little bit from the end where I do all of these crazy things. I decided because I'm a fiction writer, I had to create a narrative out of this project. I had to figure out how to tell a story. So chapter 1 is called Road Tripping. Wait, you're going to follow the path of a group of fictional characters? I was at a holiday party in Providence, Rhode Island, and I just finished explaining to a famous poet from Boston that I was working on a project about Blood Meridian, Cormac McCarthy's 1985 Western, or anti-Western. My book, I explained, would be part travel narrative, part something else that was a little murky to me. I was acting on a writerly hunch that it would be fruitful to retrace the route of the Glanton gang on their murderous spree through Chihuahua, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. The poet laughed. That's crazy. You're absolutely right, I said, because crazy coming from a poet is usually a compliment. The Committee on Faculty Scholarship at Holy Cross was rather less amused by my request for research funds to go hunting for a gypsum lake in New Mexico and rent a bicycle and pedal between Yuma, Arizona and San Diego, California in early May when it would be as hot as hell. Can you explain further how each of the trips you propose will directly contribute to the book you are writing? Perhaps you could explain the structure of the book and what parts the travel will most directly inform. In response, I wrote a smart-sounding disquisition on the imperative that creative writers follow their intuitions. I invoked my unconscious and its critical role in my process. I said I was inspired by the third view work of the photographers Mark Klett and Byron Wolfe and the writer Rebecca Solnit, especially their book Yosemite in Time, in which they re-photograph iconic images of the park, shot by earlier photographers to show how Yosemite has changed over time, as well as to consider ideas about wilderness. Perhaps they could do a literary version of their work and show how McCarthy, who also traced the route of the real Glanton gang in order to write Blood Meridian. The Glanton gang, I should say, was a group of mid-19th century scalp hunters, hired, this is actually true, hired by the governor of Chihuahua City to hunt Apaches, to scalp them. They would prove that they'd done their work by bringing the scalps back to Chihuahua City. And so the book is about this group of scalp hunters. Perhaps I would do a literary version of that work and show how McCarthy transforms the real landscape in the process of making landscapes for his book, reminding the committee that I was not a literary critic, God no, I'm a fiction writer, and that my work would not primarily be a work of criticism. I conceded that my project was a little crazy, though no more outlandish than other responses to the novel. At a conference on Blood Meridian in 2010 at Texas State University, a group of scholars threw a 25th birthday party for the book that included, quote, a tombstone-shaped cake that bled raspberry filling and was covered with gray texture icing, candy skulls, and chocolate scalps. Oh. I know. The keynote address at that conference took the form of a haiku. I got the money. For a long time, Blood Meridian has puzzled me. It has some elusive quality, something just beyond my grasp, something that remains forever and always mysterious. It's a book, as I said, that I've read about a dozen times in the last 25 years, puzzled over, dreamed of, bragged about, used in the seduction of men, I don't know how that worked, discussed in no intellectual terms, taught, and vowed never to teach again. My vintage international edition, 1992, is starred and underlined and heavily annotated. The cover, long hanging from one corner, has finally fallen off. The novel opens with a character known only as the Kid, who for no explicit reason sets out from his Tennessee home at the age of 14 to seek his fortunes on the frontier. It's 1847. The Kid wanders through the South fighting men. He meets a man named Toadvine, and they nearly kill each other when neither of them will budge from the wooden planks to the jakes, or the outhouses. The next morning after coming to, they team up and kill a man and burn down a hotel. Then the Kid breaks a bottle over a barman's head and shoves the jagged glass into the barman's eye socket because the man won't give him a drink. All of this happens in the first 2 chapters, which are just 27 pages. A man called the Judge also appears here. He rises at a revival meeting and accuses a preacher of having sex with a goat and an 11-year-old girl. Later he says he never set eyes on the man before. The Kid joins up with a volunteer army that is pissed off by the end of the Mexican-American War and the terms of the Treaty of Guadalupe. The Comanche ambush the ragtag band of soldiers, slaughtering almost every last one, slathering themselves in gore, and sodomizing the dying. The Kid survives, and with a fellow soldier named Sproul, who's suffering from consumption, makes a desperate journey through the desert without water or weaponry. They encounter many gruesome sights, including a tree hung with dead babies. Eventually, the Kid is captured and taken to a prison in Chihuahua, Mexico. After that, the Kid throws in with the Glanton gang, a motley crew of Mexicans, Native Americans, Black Americans, and white ones, including the Judge. The head of the gang, Captain Glanton, has a contract with the Mexican government to hunt Apaches and harvest their scalps. After leaving Chihuahua, they set out along the borderland of Mexico and the United States, riding by horseback and bedding down at night in deserts, old corrals, town plazas, and windy plateaus. The gang narrowly misses an ambush by Apache, but each assumes his position, including the Kid, who is, quote, letting off the shots as slowly and with care as if he'd done it all before in a dream. They keep riding, eventually coming across an old presidio where a group of prospectors is holed up after having been chased by savages. Before the gang rides out the next morning, a 12-year-old boy is found dead. They ride on, and Tobin tells the little Kid a long story about the Judge making gunpowder in the middle of nowhere. They keep riding, and a bear carries off one of the Delawares. They continue riding mostly at night for 2 weeks until they finally come upon the Jaleños, aka the Apache, camped along a lake, and they slaughter them. The Kid, who's been largely absent, attempts to come to the aid of one of his fellow gang members who's been wounded by a lance, but Glanton warns him off and then he shoots the injured man. Later, David Brown, another member of the gang, asks someone to help him remove the arrow from his thigh, but all refuse except for the Kid, who pushes it out. Fool, a man known as the ex-priest tells him, God will not love ye forever. The Judge kills and scalps an Apache baby he saved from the massacre. And Toadvine threatens to kill the Judge, but doesn't. The gang keeps riding and fighting until they reach Chihuahua, where they redeem 128 dried scalps and 8 heads, dine with the state governor, and party until the city turns into a ghost town and all the young girls are locked away, and someone scrawls, Mejor los Indios. In small towns, they are greeted as heroes, but when they leave, the streets are empty. They ride on and on and on, slaughtering a tribe of peaceful Native Americans known as the Tiguas, emptying small villages with their guns, killing Mexican soldiers, twice returning to Chihuahua to retrieve their scalps. After the last time, the governor ends his program of paying for Apache scalps. Instead, there's a bounty of 8,000 pesos on Glanton's head. I'll stop there. This is the midpoint of the novel. So you're getting the idea of the novel, right? That's just like one horrific act after another, after another, after another. Eventually, as you can imagine, the gang falls apart. They're in Yuma. They've taken the ferry crossing across the Colorado. They've tricked the Native Americans, the local Native Americans living there, and eventually the Native Americans retaliate and they kill most of the Glanton gang. But the Kid and the Judge and a few others escape. I have, of course, left some things out. There are many long descriptions. My students we nicknamed our class the other day, like, I can't say it, but like, another landscape novel? We've read a lot of landscape descriptions this semester. So I've left some things out. There are many descriptions of the landscapes of the Southwest, of deserts and mountain ranges, gypsum lakes and sandstone cities, the sun ascending or descending, and each one's effects on the sky, distant lightning and thunderclouds. The judge frequently holds forth on geology and history, on man's relationship to nature and the nature of men's hearts. He kills puppies too. Pack mules are pushed from cliffs. The men get drunk a lot. Most novels, as you know from your study of them, are comprised of a series of causally connected events. That's what we look for in a novel. We want a novel to explain the randomness of our lives to us. B happens because of A. In aspects of the novel, E.M. Forster distinguishes between story, and by story he means really anecdote, and plot. Story, he says, is, quote, a narrative of events arranged in their time sequence, while plot, he says, is also a narrative of events, the emphasis falling on causality. The king died and then the queen died is a story or an anecdote. We know that these two things happen, but we don't actually understand the causal relationship between those two things. The king died and then the queen died of grief is plot, right? So we understand that the queen died as a result of the king's death. For most of Blood Meridian, the acts of violence are random and disconnected. Native Americans, Mexicans, and even some white Americans keep being killed, mostly because the Glanton gang's relentless violence, relentless movement that they rode on. This phrase, they rode on, they rode on, they rode on, appears probably 100 times in the novel. The phrase, they rode on, and they rode on, and they rode on, keeps bringing them into contact with new people to kill. While a desire for money initially sets one plot line in motion, it doesn't account for the characters' all-consuming zeal for blood. Why do the characters do what they do? Isn't the right question to pose about Blood Meridian, because the characters, either as mythic figures or historical actors, have limited autonomy on the stage that McCarthy creates for them. Except that from time to time the novel breaks its own rules and half-heartedly invites us to contemplate the kid as a character whose thoughts and feelings might motivate him. Blood Meridian begins and ends with the kid, but as my summary of the plot, or I like to call it the not plot, indicates, the kid fades into the background during the middle of the novel, except when he's separated from the gang. So this was my obsession. Over the years, I found myself wondering why McCarthy does this. And by this, I mean the following. Why introduce the kid as the protagonist only to make him disappear during many of the most horrifyingly depraved and unimportant scenes in the middle of the novel? Why bring him back in the end? This, of course, leads to a few other questions, including some that you're not really supposed to ask about novels, like what's the kid actually doing during those violent scenes? I've also become gradually obsessed with the weird point of view, specifically with the way that McCarthy radically limits our access to the kid's interiority. That is, we don't actually know what the kid thinks. So we have a novel without a point of view character, unless you consider the narrator as a kind of point of view character. So we never get to process anything through the mind of a character in the novel. So we don't actually get to know we don't know what the kid thinks, while simultaneously making him the only character, almost the only character, who has with perceptive faculties in the novel. So in key moments, we see the world through the kid's eyes and even experience the kid's physical pain. Whenever McCarthy does allow the kid to step forward from the Motley Glanton gang in the middle of the novel, the kid demonstrates concern or even compassion or affection for the other members of the gang. The kid makes decisions as though he feels things, not as though the hand of fate or history is dictating his actions. But the nature of these feelings remains mysterious because McCarthy holds his cards very close to his chest, never revealing the kid's thoughts. We know something is happening in the kid's head, we just don't know what. Because of the enigmatic nature of the kid, the not plot, the novel's relentlessly horrific violence, because of the unconventional choices that McCarthy makes as a novelist to create a work that is part myth, part something else, because of the way McCarthy sometimes seems to sadistically withhold information and rend the fabric of the novel, the effect of which is the feeling that something is missing, and if you only paid closer attention, you'd figure out what it was. For all of these reasons and others that I probably don't totally understand, because brilliant novels are not fully knowable, I set forth on a quest in the spring of 2017 that was shoehorned into stolen bits of times when I wasn't teaching here at Holy Cross, or reading out-of-season Halloween stories to my 2-year-old son. If only I could discover some crucial piece of information about the kid, my thinking went, then maybe I could finally figure out Blood Meridian and its disturbing grip on me. And part of this comes from the fact that towards the end of the novel, the judge, who's this very erudite character, he accuses the kid of having shown clemency for the savages and for having betrayed the gang in some way. And you can see how this sort of sets the reader up, or certainly a reader like me, into thinking like, did I miss something? Is there some clue? Something that is gonna help me understand the kid? Something I missed while reading that will shed new light on the kid. So this was my project. Very crazy, kooky project. So to figure out the kid, I decided I would compare the fictional novel to the historical source material. So that you can go to the archives at Texas State in San Marcos and read earlier drafts of Blood Meridian. And I'd read an article that suggested that McCarthy very, very deliberately cut the kid's interiority out of the draft, out of the final copy of the novel. So earlier drafts, my thinking might allow me to see what the kid was thinking at certain key moments. And that might allow me to sort of do a slightly different reading. Like maybe I could find traces of that interiority in the published novel. So that was my kind of crazy idea there. So I wanted to go to the historical source material. I also decided that I would try to locate the real book in real places. So I would go and retrace the route of the Glanton gang. I wasn't exactly sure why I thought that was a good idea, but I had my writerly hunch that it would be fruitful. And I also thought I would read the, so I just confused a few things. So I would read the earlier drafts, but I also thought I would go, there's an important text called My Confession by Samuel Chamberlain, and it's supposedly, Samuel Chamberlain was this veteran of the Mexican-American War. And he wrote this memoir of his time in the Mexican-American War. And supposedly at the end of that time, he joins up with the Glanton gang. And his memoir allegedly provides the prototype for the kid. So McCarthy read his memoir. He took that character from Chamberlain's memoir, and he also took the judge from Chamberlain's memoir, because the judge can't be found in any other historical materials. So I thought I would read I would read this memoir, and that would also give me more insight into Blood Meridian. So my plan, I thought, was, deeply crazy, but I also knew it was going to be really fun. Over the course of 10 weeks, I logged 1,100 miles in 6 days in New Mexico, discussed the novel with strangers in a clothing-optional hot springs deep in the Gila National Forest, bought non-refundable tickets, airline tickets to Mexico. I discovered it was too dangerous to travel in the state of Chihuahua. Pored over early drafts of the novel in the archives at Texas State University until my eyes almost bled. Hiked parts of the Overland Trail between Tucson and San Diego. Drove dirt roads in the Anza Borrego Desert, watched Border Patrol helicopters hover 200 feet above me while wondering why they didn't consider me an interloper. Learned how to pitch a tent. And when I wasn't doing all that, I was sitting with Cormac McCarthy's deeply affecting novel on my lap or my desk, studying the passages that make my stomach lurch or my heart soar, or both at the same time, and trying to understand how McCarthy makes these things happen. So I'm going to just read a little bit. This is a little bit of what I found in the archives, this mysterious note that I found in the archives. So this is from chapter 2 called The Bearer of This Note. In an early unpublished draft of Blood Meridian, I encountered a curious exchange between the man, so the kid eventually is called the man later in the novel, and it's a curious exchange between the man and a group of younger children he comes across long after he's left behind the Glanton gang. So these are children, he encounters these children outside of Griffin, Texas, and they ask him what he's wearing around his neck, and then they accuse him of being a liar. He says he's wearing a scapular of ears around his neck that belonged to one of his fellow gang members, like 100 dried ears around his neck. Those aren't Apache ears, Elrod, the ringleader, says. They're too black. I bet them that Apaches would give a watermelon a pure fit, Elrod taunts. It's 1878, so the novel opens in like 1847, 1848. It's 1878, the kid is 45 years old, the last herd of buffaloes has been wiped out, and now bone pickers roam the plains, quote, kicking down the calcined architecture, breaking apart the frames with axes. The land is ravaged, the culture of the frontier reduced to a series of cliches that the children banter about, whiskeys and whores, prairie scouts and meanness. Griffin, they brag to the man, is the, quote, biggest town for all sin in Texas, and as lively a place for murder as you care to visit. They say you can get clapped a day's ride out when the wind is right. These kids think all this stuff is very cool because they haven't experienced it directly. In this early draft, the man pulls a piece of paper out of his wallet in his saddlebag, hands it to Elrod, the only literate one of the bunch, and asks him to read it. Elrod starts to read the letter. The bearer of this note, he pauses. In his tiny hand, McCarthy adds, his face drained. The fact that McCarthy adds this to the typed page makes me even more anxious. What does McCarthy know now that he didn't know when he first drafted the scene? What does the note say? Elrod insists that he can't read it. Why can't you read it? One of the other children asks. Just can't. It ain't smudge nor nothing. He handed the note back to the boy. Read it. I can't read it. It's got some big words in it. No, it ain't, the man said. It ain't but 9 words, and they ain't a one got more than 6 ciphers. Why don't you just read it yourself? Elrod wants to know, presumably because the man seems to know so much about the letter. They go back and forth some more. The man mentions that several other people have started to read the letter before refusing to finish it. You better just read the damn note, McCarthy scribbles at the bottom of the page. And then, oh Jesus. And then something else, though I can't quite make it out, because McCarthy's note runs off the page, or my photocopy isn't good, or both. So that's where the passage ends, with, oh Jesus. So when I came across the scene, I thought, here's the key, right? I thought, oh, there's something in this note that's going to reveal something of the kid that will make me understand the novel. I thought, here's the key, the letter. It must be important if the kid, who cannot read, has been carrying it around for ages and trying to get someone to tell him what it says. If only I knew what it said, or even just who wrote it, I was sure that the novel might come together in some new and revealing way. So this is one of the kind of mysteries that haunts the book, that I keep trying to figure out what this note says, right? So I'm going to just go on and read a little bit. So it turned out that it was actually very fruitful to go and walk in the desert by myself. I mean, maybe it was fruitful because I had the book on my mind, right? And it was this like way to like really meditate on the book. Actually, Rebecca Solnit says is that the great thing about walking is that it disguises thinking, because we tend to see thinking as doing nothing. And so we often don't give ourselves time to think because we think we always have to be productive. So I was walking, but I was actually thinking. But the other reason I think that these trips into the desert were really important is because so many of the questions I had about the kid had to do with perspective and had to do with what he was seeing and how he was perceiving the world. And being out there, just being in these huge places, like these very empty deserts, like where no one was around, just reminded me about it really brought to me the fact that it was like how terrifying it would be to be out there, and particularly if you had someone like the judge after you, right? So this happens in the Anza Borrego desert. Like the judge is hot on the kid's heels trying to kill him, and they're surrounded by the skeletons of all these mules and sheep that have perished trying to make it to water. So it's like a really terrifying landscape. So this chapter is called Footprints. In Ocotillo, the last town before the Anza Borrego Desert State Park, and I'm also making fun of myself a lot in this chapter, which is where the judge and the kids play their game of cat and mouse, I stopped at the Red Feather Off-Road Market and Cafe on the aptly named North Imperial Highway for some real food, a hamburger, cup, and ice cream bar. I wanted to make sure I was fully fueled for my adventure. And one thing that's interesting about Blood Meridian, like there's almost never mention of any of the characters eating. You know, like the book doesn't attend to like the kind of the practical matters like that. So I wanted to make sure that I was fully fueled for my adventure, especially since my provisions for the next 2 days consisted of apples, avocados, a can of beans, tortilla chips, Mexican cheese, half a salami, mixed nuts, coffee, and half, and 4 gallons of water. Oh, and a 6-pack of Corona. Where are you headed? Asked the young guy working the counter. The Anza, I answered, trying to sound like I knew what I was doing. Are the trails well marked? I think so, he said. So are there like maps? There are big signs, he said. The big signs have maps on them. I short. He looked me up and down. Some old men had just scolded me in a gentle, fatherly fashion for walking around with my shoelaces untied. Watch out for snakes, he said. Rattlers? I was still trying to use the lingo. My sister killed a 6-foot diamondback last week. They're just coming out of hibernation. Oh, geez, that's right, I said. Be safe. I was heading out into the desert to try to feel like the kid. First, however, before leaving civilization, I had to send my husband a link to the map in case he eventually needed to organize a search party. We were half serious. Then I drove on. Carrizo Creek, marked only by a simple roadside sign, was not exactly where I thought it would be, but close enough. I turned off the Great Imperial Highway and maneuvered my little white Nissan Versa rental several miles down Washboard Road, stopping far short of the end. I wanted to give myself plenty of time and space to have a Blood Meridian sort of experience. I planned to hike until I came to the southern immigrant route, which I suspected was likely the place where the kid and Tobin would have encountered abandoned wagons and the skeletons of mules and horses that hadn't survived the desert. Before setting out, I filled the plastic bladder of my camelback with water and stashed my reading glasses, notebook, pencil, mixed nuts, car keys, and copy of Blood Meridian in one of my camelback pockets. I applied sunscreen, stuck my cell phone in my front pocket, changed from my running shoes into my hiking boots, put on my hat and sunglasses, hung a camera around my neck, and peed. Then I was off. Carrizo Creek is where the showdown between the judge and the kid takes place. The judge appears over a rise wearing the clothes of Brown and Toadvine and armed with their weapons. Sneaking up on the kid and the ex-priest, he fires at both, missing the kid but putting a hole straight through the ex-priest's neck. It's a hallucinatory scene. The land is littered with the carcasses of thousands of sheep that perished trying to make it to the creek. Wounded from the human attack, the kid bathes his leg in the creek. Quote, the marbling of blood that swung from his thighs were like thin red leeches in the current. The judge seems supernatural here. He is everywhere and nowhere, appearing, disappearing, and then reappearing, though never where the kid expects him. Quote, the kid stood up, the revolver in both hands. He wheeled. He saw the judge, and the judge was in another quarter altogether, and he had the rifle already at his shoulder. After shooting, the kid drops to the sand. Then, quote, he raised to his knees, and he looked for the judge, but the judge was not there. The judge shoots the ex-priest as he carries a cross before him, quote, fashioned out of the shins of rams. The kid kills the judge's 2 horses. The idiot, the idiot is a man who's mentally disabled, who is the judge's sidekick. The idiot, naked save for his hat, also keeps popping up where the kid never thinks he will be. I hiked on and on. Tragically, it was a beautiful day. By this time in mid-May, the weather should have been blisteringly hot, the sun a pounding fist. But it was just 80 degrees and the heat felt good. Another disappointment was that Carrizo Creek was dry. Yet another Border Patrol helicopters kept whirring overhead, polluting the silence. Instead of thinking about the kid, I found myself wondering whether Border Patrol could possibly mistake me for an illegal immigrant, and even why they didn't. I checked my phone. I wanted to make sure I was heading towards the old overland route to California. When I finally got there being somewhere that I confirmed by looking at my phone and seeing that my blue dot overlapped with a snaking line, I guessed that the route was the trace of a trail following the edge of a wash. I hiked on and on until it wasn't clear whether I was following a trail or just creating the illusion of one by threading my way through cacti. I checked my phone again and discovered I'd drifted. Now I was a blue dot in a big green area. The problem with trying to put myself into the kid's shoes or enter into his consciousness or enter into his experience was that my own interiority, my inner monologue, kept interrupting my imaginative efforts. Of course, this is the problem anytime you try to do anything as ludicrous as try to inhabit the fictitious world of a fictional character. A more meaningful problem was that I wasn't sure the kid's metaphorical shoes actually contained anyone. In Blood Meridian, the kid sometimes appears to be a mythic character, devoid of thoughts and feelings and chained to a predetermined fate, and sometimes seems to be a more conventional character who thinks and feels and makes decisions that might change the course of his life. The tension is apparent in the narration itself, or the relationship between the narrator and the kid as a point of view character. As I noted earlier, for most of the middle of the novel, we do not perceive the world through the kid's eyes. Instead, the narrator conveys the world to us. And I'm gonna just, do I have time? Okay, I'm gonna just look at one passage, just to sort of explain what I mean. So there are 3 extended passages, however, where the narration returns to the kid in a limited fashion, and we see the kid surveying the world around him. We have some access to his physical suffering, although not to his thoughts or feelings, either about his pain or anything else. Unsurprisingly, these moments occur when the kid is separated from the group to which he has attached himself, after Captain White's army is attacked by the Comanche early in the novel, and the kid wanders, first by himself and then with a sidekick named Sproul, following the skirmish with General Elias when the kid is assigned to kill a wounded man, Shelby, and then this scene in particular at Carrizo Creek, the hallucinatory place. Because the kid and the judge are playing a high-stakes game of hide and seek out in the desert, perception is of paramount importance. Immediately after someone has shot the kid as he drinks from a stream, the kid starts looking for his assailant. Here's how the scene unfolds. He spun on his belly and clambered sideways, scanning, right, so there's a perceiving word, scanning the skyline. He saw the horses first, standing nose to nose in a notch among the dunes to the south. He saw the judge, clad in the gusseted clothes of his recent associates. He was holding the mouth of the upright rifle in his fist and pouring powder from the flask down the bore. The imbecile, naked save for a hat, squatted in the sands at his feet. The kid scuttled to a low place in the ground and lay flat with the pistol in his fist and the creek trickling by his elbow. He turned to look for the ex-priest, but could not find him. He could see through the lattice of bones the judge and his charge on the hill in the sun, and he raised the pistol, rested it in the saddle of a rancid pelvis, and fired. He saw the sand jump on the slope behind the judge, and the judge leveled the rifle and fired, and the rifle ball whacked through the bones, and the shots rolled away over the dune lands. In contrast to many of the novel's other landscapes that are nearly always described from the narrator's point of view and in language that's far more baroque and beautiful than this, this setting is primarily constructed by the kid who is scanning his surroundings. First, to figure out who shot him, and second, to defend himself against the judge. As is the style in this section, and indeed in other sections where the kid takes center stage in Blood Meridian, the narrator reminds us repeatedly that it is the kid who perceives, right? He saw, he looked, he turned to look, he could not find him. And this is where my sort of interest as a writer comes in. Such filtering language, which is like a creative writing 101 term, asks the reader to observe the observer, right? So we're being reminded that that the kid is observing. He's the observing, he's the observer, the apparatus through which we're seeing things. So such filtering language asks the reader to observe the observer. So we're asked to observe the observer observing, rather just going straight to the object of his observations. It reminds readers of the artifice of fiction, pulling them out of what John Gardner calls the vivid and continuous dream that is fiction. In most contemporary fiction, writers cull many of these reminders after they establish a point of view. So you tell the reader who's observing, and then you don't need to tell the reader, remind them of that anymore. We know the perceptions belong to the point of view character because there's generally only one consciousness outside of the narrators in any given scene. As As the distance between the narrator and the point of view character closes, the writing becomes livelier, the sentence is leaner. Once you eliminate saw, for example, which is a relatively passive verb, then you have to figure out what the things you are observing are actually doing. You have to tap into the energy of your description. We also draw closer to the point of view character because we're seeing the world through his eyes, and the characters are actually constructed through language. We glimpse what this feels like at the end of the 4 paragraphs I've quoted. After the 2 he saws, the narrator briefly stops interrupting and allows the kids' observations to stand on their own. The judge was holding the mouth, and just quoting it again, the judge was holding the mouth of the upright rifle in his fist and pouring powder from the flask down the bore. The imbecile, naked save for a hat, squatted in the sands at his feet. We know that that's the kid looking at that. So what? Weirdly enough, passages like this one beguile me. On the one hand, they invite us to be intimate with the kid, finally allowing us to see the world through his eyes. This world rendered in beautiful and closely observed details shows the scope of the kid's expertise. For instance, he knows enough about guns to understand what the judge is doing. And they hint at his current concerns. The judge is dressed in the clothes of the men who stayed behind at the well, while the imbecile is naked, save for a hat. So what does that tell us about the men who left behind at the well? What's their fate? On the other hand, this passage and others like it underscore the extent to which the narrator has us, readers, the kid himself, on a pretty short leash, yanking us out of the flow of the kid's observations with each he saw, right? Reminding us there's this narrator pulling the strings, right? Lest we forget who is really in control. It is true to some extent that these interruptions might be explained by the fact that this is a chase scene and perspective is critical. You know, when you have a chase scene, the whole point is tracking someone. The suspense partially builds from reminding us that the kid is watching the judge come closer and closer and then level his rifle and fire it. Consider film and the way the camera cuts back and forth from a shot of the protagonist looking to the shot of the object of the protagonist's gaze. Moreover, the way McCarthy limits our access to the kid's interiority can be deeply frustrating and also seductive. I think that's the effect it had on me. We see some of what the kid sees. We briefly inhabit his body when we learn his leg is throbbing from the shaft of an arrow buried in it. But we never find out what he thinks or feels about the world that he perceives. You know, with the appearance of the judge clad in the gusseted clothes of his recent associates, for example, does he wonder how the judge got those clothes? How he got the rifle? Is he worried about the fate of his friends? Is he surprised to find the judge trying to shoot at him? Does he speculate on the judge's motives? And I'm gonna just read one more little section. So the narrator's shiftiness, which I've tried to describe in that last scene, starts to matter even more when the kid and an earlier associate, this happens earlier in the novel, come upon one of the most disturbing sights in Blood Meridian, which is a bush of dead babies. This is sort of what the novel is known for. So here's the description. They stopped side by side, reeling in the heat. These small victims, 7, 8 of them, had holes punched in their underjaws and were hung so by their throats from the broken stalks of a mesquite to stare eyeless at the naked sky. Bald and pale and bloated, larval to some unreckonable being. The castaways hobbled past. They looked back. Nothing moved. To borrow a question from James Wood, whose words are these? So James Wood talks about the way the language starts to kind of like, the descriptions of things start to reflect the point of view character. So that when we're reading something that's not dialogue, we wonder, is this the point of view character's perspective? Which words belong to the point of view character? Which words belong to the narrator? And oftentimes we can hear the difference between them. So whose words are these? Because McCarthy has conceived of an all-knowing narrator, the hesitation, is it 7 or 8 babies hanging from the tree, strongly indicates that it's the kid who's doing the perceiving at the beginning of the scene. Counting is a form of cognition, of trying to make sense of this tragic sight, though it's also an especially dispassionate way of coming to terms with the slaughter of innocents. As long as the language remains relatively factually descriptive, that is, the babies have holes punched in their underjaws, by broken stops of a mesquite, it's conceivable it's the kid who continues to narrate, that we continue to see this sight through the kid's eyes, though not for long. Once we're told that the babies stare eyeless at the naked sky, bald and pale and bloated, larval to some unreckonable being, we hear the narrator with his poetic diction and nihilistic vision take over again. The sudden shift in perspective from standing in the same plane to a bird's eye view, the turn to one of the book's motif, blind eyes looking heavenward but seeing nothing, and the recapitulation of the book's obsession with how humans can be reduced to things unrecognizable, these are the narrator's trademark moves. The narration hovers above the kid he and Sproul described as castaways, until the end of the passage when it seems to drift back down to the kid and Sproul as they look back and see that nothing has moved. Again, so what? Part of what makes Blood Radiance so difficult and disturbing in my estimation is that the narrator interrupts the kid at key moments, overriding the kid's potential reactions, or even to be fair, his indifference to what he witnesses with the narrator's central claims. God is dead, all humans harbor within them a taste for violence, war trumps everything. And history marches on with indifference to suffering, bleak. But it's more than that. We want someone other than the narrator or the judge who speaks more than any other character in dialogue to interpret the events of this world for us. We want someone human. McCarthy appears to flirt with the idea of giving the kid some interiority. He constructs the kid so that the kid has recognizably human reactions to the suffering of his comrades, showing concern for them, coming to their aid, offering water, etc. For these reasons, it sometimes seems possible that the kid could step into the part of a more conventional protagonist, but he doesn't. In fact, the novel reenacts the kid's failure to play this role again and again. We want someone to process the violence for us, but no one does except the narrator, and the narrator never says anything to make us feel better. If anything, the narrator wants the reader to suffer in abject isolation, because only through suffering do we come to reconsider the messages perpetuated by thousands of stories we've read and absorbed about the conquest of the West. So I'll stop there and answer any questions. Thank you. Apologies if it was long. Are there any questions?
I can start.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I read it. You touched in passing, I mean, obviously it's the violence, it overwhelmed you.
Yeah.
And the, I don't know if nihilism is the right word, but this
Yeah.
but the thing that stayed with me in the decades since I read it is the incredible language.
Yeah.
And particularly the vocabulary.
Yeah.
Which is, you come across, I mean, I think I'm reasonably well-read.
Yeah.
And you have a reasonably good vocabulary.
Right.
I mean, you come across these words you've never heard before,
Right.
and they're always spot on when
Yeah.
you look them up.
Yeah,
They
totally.
just, they're perfect.
Right.
And then, so to me, I just remember the power of the language
Yeah.
as much as the frustration of the characters. Which
Yeah.
is there too. I just wondered if you could comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked a lot about this. I mean, maybe one of my students can comment on this, because we talked a lot about this in class, how that the beauty of the language contributes to I think, contributes to the disquieting feeling that the novel produces. That, you know, like you're reading these beautiful descriptions
Of horror.
of horror,
Yeah.
of massacres, right? And so that like, you get caught up in the beauty of the language and the momentum of the language. And then you're like, oh wait, they're like, you know, people are being like, you know, people are being sodomized on the beach, or, you know, are being scalped, you know, or like there are these like beautiful descriptions of scalped heads, you know, to some extent. So I think for me that's part of what McCarthy's up to, and that's part of why the novel has the effect that it does. Because but it's also, I mean, another thing I'll say is that I think the language also kind of is a little bit disorienting, right? That you're, you know, like as you come across word after word that you don't understand,
Yeah.
you know, you're like, whoa, you really feel like you're
Humbled.
Yeah, you feel humbled, and you
Yeah.
also feel a little bit like overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you guys, Patrick, you should jump in here.
Oh, I mean, I just think it gives it kind of this like spiritual quality when really there is no spirituality to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it really kind of tries to elevate something.
Right.
Which I guess goes into like that idea of celebrating kind of war and like the
Yeah.
like, the perpetual war that goes on in the book, or that the
Right.
narrator celebrates.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
I suppose in your own reading of the novel, especially when you talk about the juxtaposition of the judge. And the
Yeah.
I mean, especially just from the basis of the only two characters in the novel who are called by the monikers and they're
Yeah.
not actually given names.
Right.
Have you ever considered, or in your reading, the fact that these two people might be two sides of the same coin, in the sense of, especially with a lot
Yeah.
of duality, in that the judge and the kid never
Yeah.
really interact on a low level, and even when you talk about in the novel when they're it's them in the desert,
Yeah.
and they're fighting with each other, that distance,
Right.
and the only real closure that happens with the interaction,
Yeah.
at least on a physical level, is later on,
Right.
when he's in the jake.
Yeah.
Um,
And that terrible embrace, or the embrace of terrible flesh. Yeah. I mean, it certainly seems that it seems to me that the judge wants to father the kid in a way, and wants to persuade the kid of his beliefs. But I'd be curious to hear what you think about them being two sides of the same.
Just,
Yeah.
I guess, approaching the novel from the sense of, especially if you talk about Chamberlain and
Yeah.
his memoir,
Right.
of almost being this, the same character, one person being a good
Yeah.
and bad conscience.
Right. I'm not convinced that the kid is, having thought about this novel way too much, I'm no longer convinced that the kid actually does have like that the kid can occupy any moral ground, so that there is some goodness in the kid, but the kid has done so much. He's just like the gang, he's a killer of men. So I don't know how you claim any moral ground when you have participated in so much violence. So I used to believe. I mean, I really sort of like my thinking about the book has changed a little bit. I used to believe that the kid like evolved morally over the course of the novel, but I no longer believe that. I think McCarthy kind of wants to very deliberately plants the seeds of that being a possibility, but then I think in the final chapters of the novel he really shuts that down. So I guess I can't say that I see, the kid has some goodness in him, but I don't think he represents goodness. Any other questions? Thank you so much for coming. And I just want to say, like, if you're an undergraduate, like, think about the books that you love and, and hang on to them, because, I hung on to this book for 25 years, and it's really, really interesting to keep going back to things again and again and again. And, like, I think that you'll find that you have a different experience each time you read something, and it both shows you the book in a new way, but also shows you yourself in a new way. So thanks so much.
Again, thank you all, and please help yourself to the refreshments, and if you can, leave us some feedback on the survey.